Game Week 8 Wildcard is a strategy that is getting more and more popular as we get towards that deadline. And in today's video, we are going to be taking a look at what those Game Week 8 Wildcard drafts actually look like. And even if you're not on a wildcard right now, this video is going to be really important to understand the players that a lot of managers are bringing into their teams. And maybe you might want to consider a couple of these players yourself. So as always, looking forward to today's video. Make sure to drop a like, aiming for 400 on this video. And of course, if you haven't already, make sure you do subscribe to the channel for daily fantasy content. Enough waffling, let's get into today's video. First up, whenever you're building a wildcard team, we need to take a look at those long-term fixtures because end of the day, when we're building a wildcard, this is a team for the long term. You don't want to be making a wildcard team and then having to make multiple changes really early on. Now, of course, this season is a little bit different because we can roll up to 5 free transfers. So what a lot of managers can do is wildcard in game week 8 and then almost do another mini wildcard later on in the season. And that is something that I'm definitely going to suggest in today's video. So firstly, let's just look at the teams from game week 8 onwards that are favourable in terms of fixtures. The top of the ticker is going to be Man United. Now, spoiler alert, I have no Man United in today's wildcard draft, but you do need to be aware that at least the fixtures are good. Now, I think we were all hoping that maybe Ten Hag would get sacked because that would really elevate Man United as a selection. But right now, I think with the flag on Garnacho and uncertainty whether he'll be available, it's either Onana in goal or Bruno Fernandes in midfield, and that is it. Sitting here right now trying to confidently tell you to buy Man United players is just very, very difficult right now. So until we see a change in Man United, even though the fixtures are good, very difficult to trust them. Brentford's still very high up, and Mbeumo absolutely on the radar, and of course maybe also a defender if you want to go down that route, either Flecken or somebody like a Collins at the back there. Nottingham Forest, an interesting one as well. Not many options available to select from, but we need to be aware that the fixtures long term are good, plenty of home games, and I really do think someone like a Chris Wood is still offering fantastic value as a forward in our teams, and he might make an appearance in today's wildcard. The one that I really want to focus on right now is, of course, going to be Spurs. We're seeing that fixture swing now for them, especially over the next 4 game weeks, 3 of those being at home. And I think if you're wildcarding now, you absolutely need to go in on Spurs. I'm not necessarily saying you need to triple up, but I think a double up is just important, especially in those attackers. You need at least one of those attackers in the team because even though Spurs are a very unpredictable team, one thing we do know is that they are going to get chances and they are going to score goals, especially at home. For that reason, Spurs need to be on your radar. And of course, teams at the bottom of this ticker, teams that maybe we can look to avoid. If you are, of course, wildcarding in game week 8, you are building a team long term. Now, Aston Villa being at the bottom of the ticker, I would not be including any of those players because long term the fixtures are poor. Champions League involvement, I think, is going to hinder Aston Villa, and I don't really see a time where you're going to jump back on them. Arsenal, on the other hand, are a team that you really do need to have consideration about because, one, they're one of the best teams in the league regardless and still one of the best defences. And if you were to go with that Arsenal in game week 8, which I absolutely think there is some sort of logic about it because the fixtures are difficult over this period. From game week 12, we see a fixture swing for them where the fixtures get a little bit easier. So even though you're wildcarding in game week 8 and you absolutely could go with that Arsenal assets, I think it's only for a 4 game week period. And then I think you need to have some sort of plan in place to bring Arsenal back in game week 12. So one school of logic is that you just actually keep Arsenal assets in this wildcard team and you don't have to plan long-term transfers, or go without them and have a mini wildcard in game week 12 where you bank some transfers and move away from certain assets. Now, one of those that we could talk about is going to be Man City. Now, they actually perfectly coincide with Arsenal's fixture swing. So Man City, Wolves, Southampton, Bournemouth, and then Brighton, and even Tottenham in game week 12 is not a bad fixture. So one thing that you could do maybe is go with a premium midfielder like a Phil Foden for the next 4 game weeks, and maybe move away from a Bukayo Saka. Then in game week 12, with those free transfers available, you then look to pivot away from Phil Foden to an Arsenal midfielder in the shape of Bukayo Saka. I absolutely think that is a strategy that some managers need to consider. Definitely one that I have considered when I am building this wildcard team. The final team, or two teams that I want to focus on right now, one of those is going to be Liverpool. Really divisive on what we think about them right now. I think the Chelsea game is going to paint a clear picture on both of those teams at what real state they're in, because Chelsea have had some easy fixtures. Liverpool have looked good under Arne Slot, but they're going to be really tested in their next two games. I think it's really difficult to go with any Liverpool assets in a wildcard team. I think Trent obviously is the big omission in these wildcards, because if you go without him, very hard to bring him back in. But with Chelsea, Arsenal, even Brighton and Villa, I think there's enough of a reason there to maybe go without Trent for this period. And again, with an understanding that if you can accumulate those transfers in the bank, that you can pivot towards him if you really want to. But I think with the other options available, going without Trent is probably the route I'll go for in a Game Week 8 wildcard draft. And finally, Chelsea. Now, I think Chelsea are Cole Palmer or nobody. That is the way that we're looking at it right now. With the fixtures coming up, Liverpool, Newcastle, Man United and Arsenal, there definitely is an argument that maybe you go without Cole Palmer over this period. But of course, with Conference League football not impacting Cole Palmer, there is an argument that even though Chelsea might not win all of these games, they are going to score goals, I think, regardless. And Cole Palmer is at the heart of everything good that Chelsea are doing. So even though it is a lofty price of 10.8 million, I still think Cole Palmer is a long-term pick for these wildcard teams if you want to go there. And then in Game Week 12, that's where the fixtures really get good for Chelsea, with Leicester, Villa, Southampton, Spurs and Brentford at home. So I think you're saving yourself a free transfer later down the line. And then in Game Week 12, instead of going for Chelsea assets, you could focus on bringing those Arsenal ones into your team. So those are the fixtures to target. Let's get into this wildcard team and talk about the specific players that I've selected. So here is a Game Week 8 wildcard draft that I have built. And of course, some managers will be able to afford this. Most likely they will be able to afford this because my team value is terrible. Others might not be able to afford it. And what we're going to do in this section is go through each and every player, pros and cons, alternatives, and importantly, if you don't have the funds available, slight tweaks that you could do to change the structure of this team. And again, let me know in the comment section if you've activated your wildcard already and what your team is. So going from top to bottom right now in this Game Week 8 wildcard team, goalkeepers, I still think there is no standout option. Now, one school of thought again is that you spend big on someone like Raya and you know that you got him for the long term, because with a wildcard team, like I said, you're building for those long-term fixtures. So even though the next four for Arsenal are difficult, and I would say tougher the games, maybe the better the Arsenal defence gets in terms of concentration, the way they suffocate games. So I wouldn't be surprised if we were to see 2 Arsenal clean sheets in the next 4. But right now, just because of team value, I do think going for the cheaper goalkeeper is probably still the play that I would go for. So currently going towards Sells at Nottingham Forest. We had a lot of debate about whether at the start of the season he was going to be the #1 goalkeeper. It looks like that is the case. He is currently yellow flagged in the game, so we do need to monitor that, because if there's any doubts about him, then we would have to pivot that to someone like a Flecken at a similar price, or we go to somebody like an Onana at Man United and just go for those fixtures that are looking quite favourable for them, even though we can't really trust Man United. One thing that you could do is go for Sells and then the 4.3 million alternative at Carlos Miguel. But end of the day, I don't want to be spending 4.3 million on a goalkeeper that might only get used for one game week. So I think we take the punt on Sells unless we get an indication that he is ruled out for game week 8. Then we will have to change this team. But I think Sells, with the Forest defence right now looking good, I think long term that is the pick to go for in your teams. I prefer him over someone like Flecken. I prefer Raya, but I can't afford him in this wildcard draft. Now, coming into the defenders, as you can see here, we have gone a bit more budget, but of course, the rest of the team a bit more expensive. So the one premium defender that I have opted for is going to be Gabriel. Now, again, the Arsenal fixtures are not favourable at all, but I do feel like this Arsenal team will pick up a couple of clean sheets going forward. And as I mentioned, it's all about not having to pre-plan transfers later down the line. I don't really want to be playing about with defenders. I think the attacking area is where we want to be focusing our future transfers. So just having Gabriel in, knowing that even if he doesn't keep loads of clean sheets over the next few game weeks, at least you have him in from game week 12 onwards, where the fixtures start to get a little bit better. I wouldn't play around with any other Arsenal defender. I think Calaflori is great, but we still don't know what is going to happen once Ben White returns, whether Timber goes to left back, whether Calaflori stays at left back. Until we know that, I would just avoid taking any more risks in that Arsenal team. Now, the rest of the defence, very, very budget. And I think there are a few that definitely could change here. So Aït-Nouri is the one that I really do like long term. I don't like Wolves at all, but at 4.4 million, I think he's offering great attacking value. And if Wolves were maybe to change manager, we might get that new manager bounce where they might go a bit more solid, and clean sheets may be a bit more of a common theme in that Wolves team. So I think Aït-Nouri at 4.4 million is worth the punt in your teams. The other two at the price points are ones to argue. Rico Lewis at 4.7 million. Very, very difficult right now to determine whether he is a starter each and every game week for Pep or a rotation risk. But if I was wildcarding right now, I still would take the risk on Rico Lewis and just hope that he features. The fixtures are good. I don't think Vardy is offering the value at 5.9 million to justify going there. I know he's scored, but I don't think that's going to be a frequent theme. So for that reason, I still would take the punt on Rico Lewis and just accept the pet roulette that is inevitably going to happen at times. And the other one is going to be Van de Ven. Now, this could be any sort of player. We could go for an Everton defender. We could go for someone like Leif Davis at Ipswich. But I think with Van de Ven, I think he's actually okay. I think the Spurs defence has been better than what we've been portrayed against Brighton. And with the home fixtures coming up for Spurs, I actually think Van de Ven is a perfectly fine pick for your teams going forward at 4.6 million. If you could afford Pedro Porro, of course. But as you can see with this team, I cannot afford that additional million to get to there. And as I've spoken about, there are some good alternatives out there. But for me, I think I'd prefer to go for someone like Van de Ven at a cheaper price. Finally, the budget enabler is going to be Greaves. Ipswich's fixtures are good. Don't really love any other alternatives out there at a more expensive price. Moving into the midfielders, Cole Palmer and Foden make up a double premium midfield. Now, again, we need to talk about the omission of Bukayo Saka right now because, as I mentioned, one thing that you could do is, of course, bring Saka into your teams and just keep him for the long term because he is a fantastic option. For me, I think Phil Foden is a massive risk, and I totally get it for those managers that are a little bit looking at this thinking, oh my God, I don't want to go there. And if that is the case, I absolutely think upgrading that to someone like a Bukayo Saka is the route to go for. It's just the argument of where we free up those funds, but we will talk about that in a minute. But for me, with those next four coming up for Man City, I think Foden gets decent minutes, and it's all going to come down to how you perceive Phil Foden. I think he's still an important part of this Man City team that still haven't really clicked in the opening 7 game weeks consistently, and I think Phil Foden is going to come back into this team, and I think he's a fantastic differential for those opening game weeks. It feels very much the case of those wildcarders in game week 6 who went for Cole Palmer. It feels like Foden is that Cole Palmer this time round, and I just think you have to take that punt. And then we can look to pivot to Saka in game week 12. Palmer, I know Chelsea are very, very tough to predict, but I think it is worth bringing him into your teams ahead of a Bukayo Saka. I know the fixtures are equally as tough for Chelsea, but I just think the underlying numbers for Cole Palmer have been so damn good. And with him not having Conference League football as well, and basically the whole Chelsea team not playing in the conference because they play a B team, I think Palmer is much more of a better option than Bukayo Saka personally. Into the other midfielders, Mbeumo, I think is just absolutely locked in with those upcoming games for Brentford if you don't own him already. Johnson for a piece of that Spurs attack, and he would be my preference over even someone like a Dominic Solanke. I think he's getting the expected goals in this team. He's really being the goal scorer. All his shots are coming in the box. He is the route to goals in that Spurs team. And finally, Dibbling at 4.6 million. Now again, I would prefer this to be upgraded to a bit more of an expensive midfielder, but that would then come at the cost of downgrading one of our forwards. And I think Dibbling is absolutely fine. He would be the player that would sit on the bench most weeks in a 3-4-3 formation, but I feel confident bringing him into the team if we have to in those few favourable games for Southampton. We got game week 8 at home against Leicester, game week 10 at home against Everton, game week 11 away against Wolves. Brilliant opportunities to play him, and then you could just happily bench him in those tough games away against City in 9 and at home against Liverpool in game week 12. So I really like Dibbling as a cheap enabler. Now moving into the forwards right now, Erling Haaland for me is just a lock. Those fixtures are too damn good. You've got a captaincy pick for the next 2 weeks. I think it's as simple as that for Erling Haaland. In terms of Dominic Solanke, plenty of mid-price forwards available in the game. Kai Havertz, Ollie Watkins to compete with him. But for me, Dominic Solanke is still the route to go for. Underlying numbers are good. Yes, few people are talking about him coming deep for build-up phases to create opportunities for the wingers, but I still see him getting opportunities in this Spurs team going forward, especially in these home fixtures. And the big thing about it is he's the cheapest of that cluster of players, and I think he's going to offer great FPL value going forward. So for me, Solanke is pretty much a lock in this wildcard team. I get the argument for other players, but I think the double up in Spurs looks really good for these upcoming fixtures that they have. And finally, we're going to go for Chris Wood. Now, I'm not as excited about Chris Wood because I always feel like he's one goal and done sort of player. But the fixtures are really good for Nottingham Forest coming up. Palace at home, Leicester away, West Ham at home, even Newcastle at home in game week 11. We know that he plays the majority of minutes. We know he's on penalties in this Nottingham Forest team. And I feel like Chris Wood is a brilliant option for your teams. But if I was looking to maybe free up some funds in this team, downgrading Chris Wood to someone like a Delap would be a consideration. My only concern about that is that if you were to do that and maybe use the funds to upgrade Foden to Saka, you are then going into this week with Greaves, Dibbling and Delap in your team. And I feel like that's one too many cheap enablers. And that is why Phil Foden is in this team at that cheaper price of Bukayo Saka. So that's going to be the Game Week 8 wildcard team. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. As I mentioned, there isn't much wiggle room with this team because of the team value. But if you wanted to get to someone like a Saka, I would sell Foden, go to Saka, and then maybe take the funds out of Chris Wood and maybe take it out of maybe Johnson and go down to a 5 million like a Rodgers. But I really don't like it. And for me, I love the idea of then sideways move of Foden to Saka in game week 12 and then maybe taking the money out of the forwards or one of the midfielders when those fixtures start to change. But let me know your thoughts on the wildcard team in the comment section. Yes, guys, okay, that's going to wrap up today's Game Week 8 wildcard team video. Slightly shorter video today, but I just wanted to touch on what I would do if I was to activate my wildcard in Game Week 8. Hope it provided a little bit of food for thought and certain players that you're looking to consider. Let me know if you've activated it in the comments section. And as always, if you enjoyed it, make sure you drop a like and smash that subscribe button. Tomorrow, I'll be dropping my team selection. Spoiler alert, might be selling Ollie Watkins. We will see. Have a great day, guys. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.